And Daniel chapter 11, verse 21, actually. So this is so powerful. And I know I was just going through small phrases through these verses and applying them to what we call history, because this good portion of this fulfilled prophecy. But we're actually getting to, getting very shortly by the time of verse 36, which we'll quit here right at that point. So it'll be a good breaking point, and we won't be too long tonight. But we're going to talk about a historical figure. Daniel is concerned. He's getting these reports back from Jerusalem because he's excited about some of the things, the decree and all of this. But there's reports of opposition and trouble, and he hadn't gone himself. He's aged, and so he's still praying, Lord, what is going to become of all this? He's praying concerning Babylon, concerning Jerusalem, how all of these things would affect Jerusalem, Greece, the Persians. And so the answer comes in concerning all of those things. And in the ensuing centuries and the near time, there's much fulfillment. And once again, I'll try and move along quickly, but we can take some of these things, and this is powerful. It actually is really powerful because we do believe the Scriptures. So when I say this is a confirmation of the truth of Scriptures, of the authority of prophecy, don't come up to me afterwards and say, well, I don't need that, I'm not preaching this because you need it. I'm preaching because it's Scripture and because I need it, right? It's powerful. You can take the prophecies of Daniel. There are those, that'll mock at Scripture. But think about the authenticity of Daniel's writings. I've said a little bit about it. And people say, well, it's written at a later time. Do you realize almost the near impossibility of that? Because of the nature of these writings. They know very little about the manuscripts that exist. They know very little about the language and the customs that are found in these scribal documents to say such a thing. There would be, at the time, the earliest copies of this writing that we have, there would be very few, you count them on half of one hand, people who would have been qualified to have forged what we know today as the book of Daniel. It was written, and we often say the Bible's written in Hebrew and Greek, but actually the book of Daniel is the most diverse language book, one of them in the Bible, because of Daniel's life of experience in the Babylonian court and Daniel's familiarity with languages that now are, and even in the times of discovering these manuscripts, some of them were nearly dead. Chaldean, some of the ancient words and phrases that he used, Aramaic. This book has phrases because they were adapted into a mixed culture like Babylon. Much like we have things that we say here in America that are not truly English, they became English or part of our vernacular. And so the way that Daniel, it would be impossible for this to be any sort of forgery coming out of those times. But of course, we don't expect unbelievers to acknowledge that. So here's the power. You say, well, how do I know that what is said here in the Bible is true? How do I know what here is said is true? About the future, those sort of things. Here we're looking at prophecy that has already been exactly fulfilled. Down to small little details. Individual men, like I showed you last week, Alexander the Great, Xerxes, other people. I've mentioned Cleopatra last week. She's in my notes again tonight. Because it is almost universally agreed upon that these are the events that Daniel described, because he does give such detail, and the nations involved and those who would rise and fall, even some of the characteristics of these particular leaders. And so that's why some people say, well, he had to have known, and somebody wrote this after the fact, to have such detail in the writings, but they don't realize how impossible that is. Verse 21, in his estate, so we were just reading about some of the Persian leaders, those who were trying to Hellenize, or in other words, when I use that term, that's talking about introducing Greek culture and Greek gods and philosophy into the temple. When I read from the notes and it says that they were attempting to Hellenize. But verse 21, we're going to be talking tonight again about a man by the name of Antiochus IV. And we have this title Epiphanes because it's not an actual name. That's the title he gave himself. He called himself God. Okay? And so Antiochus IV, we've read about several men by this name, who was, and again we learn, he's come up in the prophecy, in the what is revealed from these angels that are appearing to Daniel at this time. He's revealed again. In his estate shall stand up a vile person. What a way to describe him in verse 21 of Daniel chapter 11. To whom they shall not give the honor of the kingdom, but he shall come in peaceably. And what a picture of the last days Antichrist this man was. He shall come in peaceably and obtain the kingdom by flatteries. And with the arms of a flood shall they be overflown from before him, and shall be broken, yea, also the prince of the covenant. And after the league made with him, he shall work deceitfully. From that time, once he's got that agreement, deceitfully, for he shall come up and shall become strong with a small people. So, in his place, a vile person. The successor of Antiochus the Great, that would be the third, his father, Antiochus the fourth, self-proclaimed himself Epiphanes, meaning appearance of God. Or to the Greeks, it would be appearance of Zeus. Zeus incarnate was what he considered himself. I am the personage of Zeus. He declared himself to be God. After the Battle of Magnesia, Antiochus IV was taken hostage to Rome when his father Antiochus III lost to Scipio. In 175 BC, his brother Seleucus IV intervened and he was released from Rome. He substituted his own son Demetrius for his brother Antiochus IV. And while Antiochus IV was in Athens, Seleucus was assassinated. Antiochus IV was referred to in Daniel chapter 8, verses 9 through 14, and then in verses 23 through 25, as the little horn. He had been called the Antichrist of the Old Testament. He has been called such. Now, he comes in peaceably. He claimed to act on, when he comes in, he claims to act on behalf of his brother's son, Antiochus. Antiochus IV Epiphanes, though, was acting on his own behalf. That becomes evident when we look at this historically. He took the kingdom for himself, much like the Antichrist of the last days, who will also exercise a false peace for a time, while being self-motivated by evil and power. The Prince of the Covenant is referred to here, the Prince of the Covenant. Antiochus had Onias the high priest killed. He had the Jewish high priest killed in 172 BC. Onias' brother, Jason, and another rival, a man by the name of Menelaus, of the tribe of Benjamin, they both wanted the office of high priest when Antiochus had slain Onias, the high priest. Both of these were willing and wanted to. See, there was a great division. One of the things we can learn from this time, we have this picture, this type of Antichrist, is there was a group of Hebrews. The Hebrews were divided completely. Those who were following all of the Greek idolatry and paganism and changing and corrupting themselves. And there were those who were refusing to do so and suffering greatly. They were not deceived by this man or by the false religion. Now that's going to be much like the last days, and we're living in the last days. A time of deception. Deception that, if it were possible, may deceive the very elect. Deception, great deception. We live in we could go into the New Testament, go into Paul's writings, and then define this time that we live in as a time of deception. False Christ, false messages, false gospels, another gospel, another truth, another Jesus, all those sort of things. And we need to be sober and be vigilant and realize that we could be deceived by something very easily, something very popular, very widely accepted, or sounding very good. And so that was happening. So here's these two men, Jason and this man Menelaus, both of the tribe of Benjamin. They both wanted the office of the high priest, but they both wanted to introduce Greek culture and customs into temple worship. Onias opposed this. He was killed, and his death allowed Antiochus IV to move forward with establishing Greek culture in Jerusalem. In 171 BC, Menelaus purchased the office of high priest from Zeus incarnate, Antiochus IV. The league made with him, and it talks about this agreement, right? This treaty, or whatever you want to call an agreement, entered into with him. The death of Cleopatra, his sister, who was queen in Egypt, created a contest for power between her two sons, his nephews, Ptolemy Philometor and Ptolemy Euergetes, for control of Egypt. Antiochus made a league with Philometor, but only for his own gain. Continuing to read from the text, verse 24 of Daniel chapter 11. He shall enter peaceably, even upon the fattest places of the province, and he shall do that which his fathers have not done, nor his fathers' fathers. He shall scatter among them the prey, and spoil and riches, yea, and he shall forecast his devices against the strongholds, even for a time. And he shall stir up his power and his courage against the king of the south with a great army. And the king of the south shall be stirred up to battle with a very great and mighty army, but he shall not stand, for they shall forecast devices against him. Yea, they that feed of the portion of his meat shall destroy him, and his army shall overflow, and many shall fall down slain. So he shall enter peaceably. We stop there. He shall enter peaceably. While in control, Antiochus robbed the richest places in his kingdom. Of course he did. That was his character. He used the money he obtained to buy alliances and secure his kingdom through loyalty. Some things should not be for sale. This was a practice his fathers and forefathers had not done. And the text, Daniel speaks to that he would participate in these practices that his fathers and their fathers had never done. Then he references the king of the south rising up here. In 170 BC, the regents Eulaeus and Linnaeus advised Ptolemy VI to recover Syria. Antiochus IV, Epiphanes, heard about the attack and invaded Egypt with a large army. Ptolemy VI made peace with his uncle in the meantime. The Alexandrians established his brother Ptolemy VIII king, causing the Egyptian kingdom to become weak. We see now, continuing in verse 27, the great wickedness of this Antiochus, this Antichrist of that time that eventually comes in and desecrates the temple, sacrificing a swine upon the altar. But verse 27, his wickedness. Both these kings' hearts shall be to do mischief. They shall speak lies at one table, but it shall not prosper. For yet the end shall be at the time appointed. Now the end is at the time appointed. That's wonderful and that's powerful. Then shall he return into his land with great riches, and his heart shall be against the holy covenant, and he shall do exploits and return to his own land. Both these kings, the kings of Egypt and Antiochus, made all sorts of agreements, sitting at tables. Neither side meant to keep their agreements, but they lied to forestall their real plans. Against the holy covenant, Antiochus sought greater riches, and seeing the wealth of the temple caused him to try to bring the treasures of the temple under his control by installing people, Hebrew people, loyal to him. Be careful of that. We're not Hebrews. We're God's people. But I could take you to a whole other sections in the New Testament where the Apostle Paul warns us of being drawn aside by winds of doctrine, false teachers, personages of Antichrist, society itself, many false doctrines, the doctrines of devils, deception in our time. Be careful of that. There were many who were completely turning on what they had been taught, upon the scriptures and upon the sacrifices and the religion of their fathers. Verse 29, we're going to learn that Antiochus becomes opposed by the Romans, and that's some serious opposition. At the time appointed he shall return and come toward the south. But it shall not be as the former or as the latter, for the ships of Chittim shall come against him. Therefore he shall be grieved and return and have indignation against the holy covenant. So shall he do. He shall even return and have intelligence with them that forsake the holy covenant. That's it right there. And have intelligence with them that forsake the holy covenant. It wasn't from the outside that really destroyed Jerusalem at this time and corrupted the temple at this time. He shall have intelligence with them that forsake the holy covenant. And arms shall stand on his part, and they shall pollute the sanctuary of strength, and shall take away the daily sacrifice. They shall place the abomination that maketh desolate. And here it is again. And so what we find here, and I don't even have to read from the notes. I want to move along quickly. But when it says at the time he shall return, he is opposed by the Romans, therefore has to turn back. When he comes back is the time when he breaks this covenant and he pollutes the temple to the most extreme. It's because of Rome. He's actually arrested again, but he forsakes the holy covenant when he's able to go back. Here it talks about the abomination that maketh desolate. Jesus speaks of that in Matthew 24 and 25, one or the other there in the Mount Olivet Discourse. And we know that this is referred to here very particularly, the acts of Antiochus, as an abomination that maketh desolate. But Daniel also has already spoke of this as being also a last days event. And then, so after this happens, Jewish scholars accepted, likely I would say that religious Jews today accept, that the fulfillment of Daniel's prophecy was this event. Matter of fact, the disciples, when Jesus calls them out, if they were familiar with this prophecy and familiar also with Antiochus in the later centuries, they would have been under the impression, most of the Jews would have all been under the impression that this is a complete fulfillment of what Daniel had foretold. And then Jesus stands up on the mount and he says, concerning the last days, and speaking of it as yet a future event, and says, when you see the man of sin, that man of sin, the abomination of desolation, standing in the holy place, and he begins to issue a warning about the time when that happens, how desperate of a time, how serious of a time it is. He says, then shall be tribulation like there's never been on this earth. In the middle of Daniel's 70th week of prophecy, in other words, in the middle of the tribulation period, in the middle of the time of Jacob's trouble, he breaks this covenant. There will be a last days. So here Josephus wrote concerning this abomination. I got to hurry. He wrote, King Antiochus, returning out of Egypt for fear of the Romans, made an expedition against the city Jerusalem, and when he was there in the 143rd year of the kingdom of the Seleucids, he took the city without fighting, those of his own party opening the gates to him from inside. And when he had gotten possession of Jerusalem, he slew many of the opposite party. And when he had plundered it of a great deal of money, he returned to Antioch. You imagine then, that's Josephus writing in the first century of what happened. This just reminds me of how sober and vigilant we need to be in these last days. Sadly, many that name the name of Christ would readily follow a devil, would readily follow someone who speaks swelling words and speaks with flattery, making promises that are not based in Scripture. The abomination of desolation in Daniel chapter 11, verse 31, is the desecration of the Jewish temple by Antiochus IV. It caused a reaction. Historically, we know this caused a reaction known as the Maccabean Rebellion. Antiochus IV rededicated the Jewish temple as a temple in Jerusalem as a temple to Zeus, picturing himself as the god on December 25th, 167 BC. No, that wasn't Jesus' birthday. This is before the birth of Christ, but it happens to be on December 25th, 167 BC, declaring himself that he is God. And you know what? We're going to stop right there for tonight. We'll continue in verse 32. I told you I wouldn't be long. And let's go ahead and stand together.